Guys, we have done it. We never dreamed that we would get to this point of doing 1.25 episodes so far. When we spoke about doing this podcast in a dingy pub in Cardiff, hashtag South Wales bias. I really enjoyed last week. And what's the feedback been like from your perspective?
Yeah, lovely, to be fair. Like, the fact that people are engaging with it either way is amazing. But yeah, we've had some great questions come in as well. So yeah, we can work through those as well as the weeks come on.
Yeah, it's been really nice. Had some nice comments. I've only had nice comments, which I think means that you must be getting all the hateful comments.
Yeah, they're going to you.
I get a base level of hateful comments on my social media. I think it's partly because of the topic I cover and also because I do seem inherently quite smug.
I'd never say that.
I have.
You have literally said that. You've both actually said that to me today, I think. But no, it's been really nice. There seems to be real interest in it. Some people obviously are very direct in their feedback, but only apparently to me. So I'm glad you guys have had a lovely peaceful week.
Lovely week.
One thing I did want to point out, because one of the nice things about doing a podcast is that you can just do whatever the hell you want. And I'm going to start off with...
a song.
I'm going to start off with... Okay, try to contain your excitement. I'm going to start off with a clip from a Senedd committee meeting.
It's a good thing I'm sitting down.
I don't want you guys to get too excited, but this is actually from the Economy, Trade and Rural Affairs Committee, okay? You okay? You okay, Mel?
Okay, I think we're doing all right, yeah.
Okay, contain yourselves. It was from a man named Professor Karel Williams. I really hope I'm saying his first name correctly. Karel? And he's from the University of Manchester. Now, he was in the Senedd committee and he was talking about a thing, stay with me, called skunk work projects.
Okay. I'm in. Yeah. I'm so in. Whatever it is, I love it.
Now, a skunk work project is essentially a innovative undertaking, it's described as online, but it's essentially putting lots of quite clever people in a room and getting them to work independently from other parts of an organisation on a specific topic. It comes from a project in World War II, but anyway, the committee were listening to him talk about skunk work projects, and he got quite frustrated because apparently he had been in, he said, 18 meetings about this, and it didn't feel like there was much progress being made. So let's listen to what he said.
I can't guarantee it's any kind of silver bullet, but it's a damn sight better than sitting in 18 meetings on what we're going to do on town planning and get out of it.
Okay. Thank you, Mick. I can now bring in Jenny Rathbone. Jenny.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your stimulating papers, because it's unusual for us to get something that really looks back on what we're doing.
Well, it's all kicking off. The passag at the end. Thank you so much for your stimulating papers. I wish I was there.
Yeah, we should go. Can we get tickets? How much are tickets?
You actually can just attend a Senedd committee meeting. You can do that.
We should do
No
that.
one does, but you can.
No, we could be there. We'd all have disguises. Would we need disguises?
You just want the paper.
Yeah, totally.
I think nothing would terrify elected representatives in Wales more than the public engaging with them.
Yeah, true.
I loved his after he said, because what did he say?
He said
fuck all.
I've tried to be as clear as I can. It's a very clear model. It can be implied in Wales. I can't guarantee it will be a silver bullet, but it's a damn sight better than sitting in 18 meetings on what we're going to do on town planning and getting fuck all out of it.
After he said fuck all out of it, he sat back with such I swore.
Drop that mic.
Absolutely.
What are you going to do?
And then all the other members watching, you could see they were actually just pissing themselves. So, the reason I brought this up is not just because it's inherently pretty funny that someone swore in a committee meeting. It's also because I think he actually makes a really good point. There is a perception, and I think a merited one, that the Welsh Government actually comes up with some ideas which are actually not too bad. They're fair, they're good, they could be, if they came to fruition, very, very successful for Wales. But there's this feeling they just either don't get done, or when they get done, they're watered down or not delivered correctly. And this feeling that they're just sitting in meetings, just not achieving stuff, when essentially Wales there's huge issues, I think is a real concern for people.
Yeah, this doing everything by committee and getting nothing done. I think that is a stereotype about the Welsh Government or councils. Is we'll have a meeting about it. and then you end up having a meeting about the meeting you've just had, and then that frustration of, can we not just do something practical? I think that's quite a fair stereotype, really.
And do you think we're linking that to the Welsh Government? Is that just all governments? Are some governments like better than others? Like, for example, is Scotland better at doing that? Like, is, Westminster better? Or is this just bureaucracy?
I don't think you look at Westminster and think, wow, that's what we need to emulate. And I think sometimes one of the... please, get me in those mahogany rooms. I think actually part of the problem Welsh politics might have had is essentially we've almost created essentially a little Westminster in... the south of Wales. So if you look at the parallels, you've got a large capital city in the southeast of the country that people perceive as pulling in money, resources and talent to the detriment of other areas. Yeah. This was only supposed to be the introduction, but I like how we've gone straight into this.
Yeah, we're in.
So how do you fix that then? If like apart from skunk work, which obviously we're all 100% behind.
100%.
I've always been a big fan of skunk work.
I love skunk work. I assume it's when you smoke loads of skunk and then you continue to do your work. Is that correct?
Oh, I thought it was like you sprayed your opponents if you didn't like what they were saying.
Yeah, if one of them was a predator.
Yeah.
We could do that. That would be fun, spraying it like sort of like a get your own back style gunge situation.
Yeah.
That would get stuff done.
That would. Imagine how quickly those committees would make choices.
If someone's filibustering, like, no, you're in the gunge tank, sorry. Sorry about that.
When you say what are the kind of solutions to these problems, I think we've actually had a question sent in from a listener.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have a listener and they've engaged.
Thanks, Mum. But yeah, so they messaged on our Instagram, didn't they, Mel?
Yes, they did. So they have asked, also called Will Owen. It's like a mix of me and you.
Very suspicious.
We've thought of and we set up an Instagram to answer the question. We're like, what should we call it?
Middle name Robin.
Hi, question if possible. I am English guy based partly in the Scottish Highlands and partly in Manchester. That's a big commute.
Yeah,
That is a big commute.
What's your job?
So why are you listening to us?
Yeah, but I love it. You're literally everything but Welsh, but I love that. And I would love to know more about the Welsh independence movement. It's something that the UK journos never talk about. Like, how big is it as a movement? How is it in comparison to, say, Scottish independence? How does Plaid Cymru compare to the SNP and local messaging? Loved the first pod. Can't wait to hear more.
Now I feel really bad that I said, why is he listening?
No,
he sounds
yeah.
lovely.
Well, continue listening.
Exactly. But also, it's if only someone had written a book about that.
Well, yeah.
Okay, well, now a lot of listeners won't know this because nobody bought it, but I actually wrote a book about Welsh independence. So I think the first thing to say is we're going to do a brief bit on Welsh independence now, but actually I think it probably merits its own standalone pod in the future, which I think would be quite fun. So if people are interested in that, let us know. But let's give a very brief overview of the situation with the Welsh independence movement. So before 2016, so before Brexit, Welsh independence in terms of popularity in the polls was ticking along at about kind of 11, 12%. It was a fairly minority interest. But then after Brexit, Yes Cymru, which was essentially founded on the back of Brexit, but there was other factors, was started and saw a huge increase in membership. We then had COVID. So COVID, for many people, was the first time they realised that there was even a government in Wales. And that created more interest in actually, could Wales do things differently? The biggest ever increase in Yes Cymru, which is one of the independence groups, it's not the only one, the biggest increase they ever had in membership was when in the 2020, you know, when we had the first lockdown in the spring, then we had the summer where we were all eating out to help out, which sounds like just the worst porno ever. And then as we went into the autumn, Wales wanted to go into its firebreak lockdown, didn't we, before other areas of the UK. But we couldn't do it for as long as necessarily the Welsh Government wanted to because Rishi Sunak refused to extend furlough for Wales. So furlough was due to end, and if Wales had been locked down without furlough, that would have been devastating for the economy. So Rishi Sunak said, no, we're not going to do that. But then like 3 or 4 weeks later, when England went into a lockdown, he did extend furlough. So that was a really big deal at the time, and that saw a big increase in support for the movement. So the high watermark for support for Welsh independence is about 1/3 of people in Wales. So that's, if you do polls, 1/3 of people support Welsh independence. Now, first things to say is, when you ask people, do you support Welsh independence? And they say yes, that doesn't mean that they are, there's this issue of salience. So how interested are people in it? Because, you know, a lot of people say, I would like to abolish the House of Lords, but that doesn't mean that everyone votes Lib Dem who want to get rid of the House of Lords, does it? So it's this thing of how big a deal it is for them. But it has become a more mainstream issue. People do actually talk about it now. A lot of people, the majority in fact, still don't support it. But it's now become something that isn't just the purview of like an old boy in a Carmarthen pub saying this is what we need to do and talking about Owain Glyndwr. There's people who actually, especially younger people, they skew massively indie. Compared to older generations. So that is the current situation with the interest. I'm guessing you guys have seen any lamppost in Wales which has a sticker on it.
Yeah, that Tafod o Ddraig sticker, yeah?
Yeah, or the Yes Cymru stickers as well.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to mix them up, isn't it? At the end of the day, and this is the problem, like, you know, there are so many little offshoots of who all want the same thing, but they're coming at it in different ways, which is absolutely fine. But I feel like with Yes Cymru, a big damaging factor that they had was the whole kind of, maybe like with the younger members specifically, you know, who are a little bit more woke, if we're going to use like that terminology, who have concerns about like allegations of racism within the organisation or allegations of transphobia and things like that. And when that was brought up with like kind of the committee or the membership, however they kind of, whatever they used, it was kind of like, well, let's just have independence and then we'll sort that out. And there was that issue of, also, if we're going to have Cymru Rydd, then it's got to be for everybody. And it kind of felt like if you are a young person of colour in Wales, or you were a young trans person, or literally knew anybody who fitted those demographics, in good conscience, you probably couldn't support Yes Cymru then because of those allegations, or even the way they weren't handled. And I think the non-handling of them is what was the biggest damaging factor, possibly.
Yeah, the idea that sort of we'll fix all these things once we've got what we want is sort of a bit worrying, isn't it? It feels like let's build the world, if that's what you want to support, let's build the world now. Let's get these things sorted now. Do you think it was a case of, obviously their membership was Yes Cymru specifically now, their membership was growing so substantially at that point that they sort of got too big before before they could walk type thing?
Losing control of it, almost like it was running away with them.
Yeah, I think so. They did grow very, very quickly, and they didn't necessarily have any of the processes in place to deal with things like internal disputes. Because as you say, there was, like many organisations, they really tore themselves apart over specific issues. They did get in a new chief exec at one point who was actually paid a salary, and he tried to professionalise it. But it was, when you've got essentially a volunteer organisation, a very passionate people who actually, when you break it down, what independence looks like depends on the person you speak to. They really did kind of tear themselves apart. I mean, give you an example of some of the issues they had. They had a huge influx in members. I think I think the figure was probably around 30,000, and I might be wrong on that, but it was around that figure. And what they didn't do was have anyone auto-renew. So once someone had been there a year, that membership ended. And so they just started losing members because they hadn't got those processes in place. So that's a fairly kind of amateur thing, but it was an amateur organisation.
Yeah, it was.
But the reason I wrote the book originally was because whenever you spoke to anyone in the independence movement and asked a specific question like, how is this going to work in Independence Wales? How will the border work? The answer was always, that's for an independent Wales to decide. And it's like, well, yes, it is for an independent Wales to decide, but if you are pitching to someone something massive like Welsh independence, like something really huge, you have to be able to say to them, at least paint some kind of vision of how these things are going to work. You can't say, jump off this cliff in the dark with me because I'm sure there's a trampoline. But what that trampoline looks like is for an independent Wales to decide. So I'll give you some examples. As I said, I think we need to do a full episode on this, but let's talk about pensions. Okay, so Mark Drakeford, when you ask him about independence, he's got some very stock answers because he likes to position himself as like full devolution, but not Welsh independence. And that's how he kind of outmaneuvered Plaid Cymru for many years. He said, the first question I'd want to ask, if I'm a pensioner, what currency am I going to be paid in? When that arrives in my account, will it be in pounds? Will it be in euros? Will it be in a Welsh currency? I think the Welsh word for pound is punt as well, isn't it?
Pint, yeah.
Pint. So basically, will it be in pints? But that was the...
being paid in pints would be quite fun, actually.
Great, yeah.
To be fair, the cost of pints now, I'd love to be paid in pints.
Yeah. That is my job, really. Like, you want to what you're getting paid for gigs. I get paid in gigabombs.
Ask for money.
But let's think about pensions, right? So how do you divide up the pensions? Because when Plaid Cymru put forward essentially a proposal for Welsh independence, the way they had it add up was that for the first kind of 20 years, the UK government would pay the pensions of people in Wales. Now, that does sound crazy, but actually maybe it does make sense, because if you went and lived in Australia, the UK government will still pay you a pension. If you've built up, paid into the UK taxpayer, that debt, for want of a better word, is with the UK government, isn't it? But then you have a situation where you would have a foreign government paying the pensions of the most vulnerable people in Wales, which obviously isn't really a very tolerable situation. But then you go, okay, so Wales will take the pensioners, but Wales has more pensioners proportionally than other parts of the UK, not least because people retire here. So then you think, right, how do we divide them up? And then you've got people who live abroad. If someone's Welsh and they move abroad, does an independent Wales start paying their pension? I'm not asking you to give an answer to this, but
Thank God.
Because I was like, I'm thinking so hard, like, I don't have the answer.
I had full I didn't revise this. I had full Monday morning. I did not do my homework at the weekend vibes then. Bless you.
But the point I'm trying to make is that is one issue, and it is incredibly, incredibly complicated. And we could talk about the border. How's the border going to work? We could talk about EU membership. Will an independent Wales be in the EU? But England isn't. 50% of people in Wales live within 20 miles of England. It's
Wow, that's a crazy stat.
It is mad, isn't it? There's pubs in Wales where the border runs through the bar. So you've got a pub and the border goes through the middle of the bar. Incidentally, when Wales did introduced dry Sundays back in the late 1800s, it meant that people in Wales didn't drink on a Sunday because we were just apparently so pious here.
Yeah. We're a moral nation. Yeah, that's what they always say.
You said you got paid in Jaeger bombs 3 minutes ago.
I've forgotten so hard. Selective memory. Yeah.
But in that pub, you would have people who would drink on the English side of the bar and then piss on the Welsh side. So it was like...
the imagery of that. Yeah. Like, if ever there was a metaphor about Wales is bloody treated, there it is.
But that's why I think part of the question the person asked us, Mel, was how is it different to Scotland? And I think there's so many ways you can break this down, but fundamentally, Wales is not Scotland. The border is a totally different thing. So Denbighshire, Wrexham and Flintshire are the most commuted out of counties in the UK. So loads of people leave them to commute out of them to work, often to like Merseyside, the Wirral. And whereas the Scottish border, massively depopulated. If you've ever driven through like that northern part of England and that southern part of Scotland, you bet you can drive and not really see anyone. So it's a very different proposition, Welsh independence compared to Scottish independence. You've also got the historical elements of it. You've got the fact that Scotland was an independent country and joined England, whereas Wales was conquered, and the psychological elements of that. I'm not going to go into all of this because actually there's a fantastic book that you could not buy. But as Welsh people, how do you feel about the idea of independence and independent Wales? Both from the head and the heart.
Sure. I feel like during the COVID sort of period, I think when we saw more devolved decisions happening within Wales, I was definitely sort of thinking about it more and seeing Yes Cymru's membership rise during that point. I was definitely thinking about it more. So I think it feels quite hopeful to me in a way. But I think that is the heart side of it, right? When we go through all the head and all the logistics of it all, and thinking about pensions, should we scrap pensions? I don't know.
That's the answer.
Maybe that's the answer.
Should
we build a massive wall? That's what we should be doing. But I think I've heard people compare it to Brexit. What we're trying to do is get control back, try and get our country back. These kind of things, and I think there's a danger of why you're doing it. I suppose that's quite a key question for me. Obviously, there's the logistics of it all, like how do we fund it and everything. But I think, why are we doing it? I think is an interesting question to ask, because I think I don't think it's similar to Brexit in my mind. I'd like the idea that obviously there's different. The federalism argument is also sort of like a halfway model, right? But I'm still very undecided. I think I'd probably describe myself as indy-curious. That's sort of where I sort of like.
That's really valid, though. I think that's really, and it's probably where a lot of people stand on it. And if there were a vote tomorrow, that's probably why it would be no, because people are curious, but like you said, the answers just kind of aren't there at the moment. But then they might never be there until or if it ever happens. But I feel like it's really weird because, like, how could you say to a country, do you want to govern yourselves? And it feels like quite a uniquely Welsh thing for us to go, I don't think so. I don't think we do. But, you know, our scenarios are different. But I feel like, for me, one of the biggest concerns was always the economy and how, you know, we would kind of manage that. But then I felt, oh, at least in the UK, there is financial security. And then Liz Truss happened. And I was like, oh, well, we don't even have that then. So I'm the same as you. I'm indy-curious. And I think with my heart, it makes complete sense for Wales to be independent. And I think if Westminster were just a bit more respectful of Wales, then fewer people would be indy-curious. But that's not the case.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I think the last sort of 14 years of Conservative rule down east, I wonder whether that's contributed to it. And I think the striking differences between Drakeford and Johnson during COVID, I think, pointed a lot of people to, it seems like we've got a serious person in charge. You know?
But then during COVID, it was kind of the part of me that was like, we would not have had the rollout of the vaccine as quickly as we did if we were not a part of the UK. And I think, you know, that's a bit of an awkward one to kind of like admit, but it's true. You know, so there are the advantages as much as I say it with gritted teeth.
Yeah, totally. Olympics, we wouldn't do that well.
No, we really wouldn't. We wouldn't. What else would we?
We'd get our own Eurovision entrant.
As we should.
And I feel like that's, honestly, that should be number one on any Yes Cymru policy.
Yeah, it's really
We're great singers.
Top of the poster.
Great singers.
Yeah. So I was such bad, for someone who's half Caribbean and half Welsh, I'm such a race traitor on both sides. I've got literally no musical ability or rhythm. I don't know what is going on.
I think
So, well, good luck with your DMs this week, man.
I think when I spoke to a lot of people about Welsh independence, people who are Welsh, they would often say, I like the idea of it, but I don't think this works. And I think that is really symbolic of the issue that the UK generally has at the moment, is that no one is going, well, I'm British. Why would there's not that attachment to that. Now, that also depends on who you ask. There's lots and lots of people in Wales who define themselves as British before Welsh. There's actually really interesting research into it. And actually, people who are older tend to skew more British. But it's a mixture. Like, I've lived my adult life in Wales, but, you know, I could usually say that I'm British. Do I want to say that I consider myself English? Yeah, that's where I grew up, you know.
Yeah.
We forgive you.
Cheers, mate. I appreciate that.
It's a lovely tattoo. It's very tasteful. Very tastefully done.
What, my bulldog?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's first Plaid Cymru MP Gwynfor Evans said anyone can be Welsh, but you have to be willing to accept the consequences, which I think is a nice quote. But that idea that people have, like the idea of Welsh independence, but just don't think it adds up. I think what people most want, more than anything else, is a system that works. I don't think you can look at what we have at the moment and say it works for Wales. I don't think you can look at it and say it works for England either. I think that you can make a really strong argument that the current system, actually, people in England are some of the least represented, depending on where you are in England. So I think it's really interesting. I think we need to probably move on, because we can go down this indie rabbit hole forever. And if people are interested in hearing more about this, maybe we do it as a standalone podcast. But I think it is worth talking about one party that's tried to capitalise on the rise in the interest in Welsh independence, and that is Plaid Cymru. And I was actually at their conference for the last few days. I know.
Okay.
My life is pretty glamorous. So, Plaid Cymru conference this year was at the Principality Stadium, which you'd think would be quite glamorous, but
They
actually...
sold 75,000 seats. Fair play, Dean, man.
The whole of Ceredigion came to... No, it was in the Principality Stadium, which you'd think would be quite glamorous, but actually it's quite dark in there.
You weren't on the pitch, I'm assuming.
We were not on the pitch, I'm afraid. They closed the roof for the atmosphere.
Yeah.
I still got fire. As Dean comes in.
The feeling with someone was just shouting "Go on, Shane!"
Yeah.
in the background. So the feeling in the party has changed a lot. So they've got their new leader, who I know you're a big fan of, Robin.
I think he's just got a really good jawline. I think he looks solid. It looks like he'd be really difficult to push over. And in a leader, that's very important for me. Yeah.
That's what you want. Yeah.
As a Cymraeg speaker, can you please pronounce his name correctly for us?
Rhun-ap-iorwerth.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you. So, Reen.
Reenie Babes.
Reenie Babes came in back in the summer of last year. Now, he replaced Adam Price after what was a really tough time for the party. So, there'd been an independent investigation which had found that the headline of the investigation was that the party had failed to have a zero tolerance approach to sexual harassment, which is pretty much as damning as you can get. I went to the party conferences for the last 3 or 4 years, and the mood now, I would say, is immeasurably different. There's a sense of positivity. There's a sense of unity within the party, I would definitely say. And there's a feeling that Welsh Labour are very vulnerable at the moment, that there are huge issues with Welsh public services. There's a Labour government in Westminster so that they can't blame the people down the other side of the M4 for their ills, and there is an opportunity there for Plaid Cymru in the 2026 Senedd election. Now, there is excitement there, but the problem that they're going to have is now that they are seen as, the polls suggest that they could be pretty much on par with Labour, which would be a seismic change, because Welsh Labour have been the largest party in Wales since 1922. They're the most successful democratic party in history. And if that was to change, that would be huge. But the issue that Plaid have got is now that they are seeming like a more credible political operator, they now are going to get some actual proper scrutiny, because it's been very easy for them just to say whatever. And because they had no real chance of getting power, they weren't going to, they didn't necessarily get the scrutiny that they were supposed to have. So first thing first, what's your impressions of Plaid Cymru as people who are interested in politics but aren't in the world, if that makes sense?
They definitely seem more professional now. I think, like you said, the word credible, I think that's a really good assessment. They just they were there, definitely, and they were making noise, but now they seem like a very credible political organisation who actually could shake things up. And the fact that they've kind of bombarded their way in and are now the opposition, you can't even compare them and the Welsh Conservatives. Like, they're the biggest threat to Welsh Labour. So, the fact is, and they had a stonking general election as well. So, if they continue that momentum, it seems like they're in a good place, and maybe under new leadership, the face of the party has changed. He's such a good communicator. Like, I saw him on Good Morning Britain. I was blown away as to how well he handled what was quite amateur questioning, to be honest. We'd be so good. We'd be so good.
What, hosting Good Morning Britain?
Yeah, could you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
3 of us. Imagine. We said, this is our audition.
Yeah. We'll send it to them.
But, I feel like they seem in the strongest place they've been.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think that I think it's this is the time for them, right? And I wonder whether they'll be able to take that pressure and use it properly, because 2 years to go now, or 18 months to go. If you are the opposition and the sitting government is kind of flailing and on their last legs, then why shouldn't they do well? I suppose they're existing in a area of politics where there is crossover, and there are the Greens, and there is Labour, and there is Plaid, and there's quite a lot, and there is the Lib Dems, and Lib Dem, and there is so there's a lot on that left area in Wales, and it's up to them to try and make them the focal point, right?
Yeah. So there is an opportunity there, but I think my concern, as somebody who wants Wales to be governed as well as possible and for us to tackle those issues, when I was there, the thing that concerned me is I worry that they might try and do a Starmer. So Keir Starmer, in run-up to the last election, his strategy was there is an immensely unpopular long-term government that is not doing as well as it should be. It's unpopular. I am just going to say I am going to bring in change. I'm not going to be specific. I'm not going to upset anyone, and I'm just going to be quiet and give them enough rope, essentially, was what Keir Starmer did, and that worked. My concern with Plaid Cymru is that they might try and employ the same tactics, because they say a lot about how we need to change, how we need difference, how things need to, they're going to do things differently. But when you dig into it, at the moment, I don't think there's a lot of meat on the bones. So I interviewed the party leader, Rhun-ap-iorwerth.
Very good.
Diolch. I interviewed him, and I wanted a specific answer. I wanted him to tell me, how are you going to bring down those waiting lists? Because in his speech, just before I interviewed him, he said, by the end of the next Senedd term, those waiting lists will be gone. We'll have cleared the long backlogs of waiting lists. Now, I heard that last time when Labour ran in the last election saying, we'll have cleared it, and actually they're going up. So I said, how are you going to do that? And I kept asking, and essentially, after 2 or 3 questions, it became clear that there isn't a specific plan or policy. They're essentially going to run the Welsh NHS better. And let me show you what his answer was. It does sound like your main strategy for bringing down the waiting list is we are just going to run the NHS better. Is that fair?
Oh, I have no doubts that promising better government, a new approach to government, a government that challenges the civil service, can make a difference. I mean, change in itself is going to be very valuable for Wales. That change in leadership. If you have a government that becomes in many ways indistinguishable from that civil service, the government tends to take on the risk aversion of that civil service because they have been responsible for all those decisions over 25 years. It's very difficult for them to suddenly accept that they got it all wrong. When you have that new energy coming in, new ideas, you're able to have that kind of fresh start. And I have no doubt that in itself will lead to a different approach, more challenging, more cooperative with the health boards, and that we can make early improvements.
You've chosen a good angle for the jawline in that.
It was strong. Yeah. Do you know what that was giving when I have not revised for an exam and I'm like, I've got 400 words left and I'm just going to say the same thing, maybe backwards, maybe forwards. I'm going to change the words around.
I've got a quote about cooperation that I remember from somebody, so I'll work my way into that somehow.
Stick it in.
Something about Henry V, I think.
1066. I don't know. What did he say?
Well, ultimately, their point is Welsh Labour have been in power for 25 years in Wales, and difference, just the act of having someone different will lead to improvements. And I think there is merit in that, you know. There's a reason why sometimes when you change a football manager, there's just an increase in performance when you've got essentially the same resources. But the issues in the health service are so huge. They are so seemingly insurmountable. The idea that they're just going to come in and go, come on, guys, do the operations and bring in fresh impetus, I think underestimates the challenge that they've got. Now, they are 20 months out from the election. So there is you'd hope they're going to put more flesh on the bones. I know that they're looking at how they can do this, but they can't just say we are going to be different. They have to have actual something to point to and go, this is what we are going to do.
But then what would you say to the people who will say, like you said, it worked for Keir Starmer?
Well, I'd say it might work in terms of potentially winning, but it won't work in terms of making the country better, which is actually the whole fucking point of being in politics.
We're not in the Senedd now, Will. Watch your language, please. You're not in committee now.
So thank you for that very interesting suggestion, Will.
It's a spirited paper.
I'm gonna give you another example. So I spoke to Luke Fletcher, who is their economy spokesperson, and we all know that Port Talbot is the steelworks at Port Talbot is closing. They've closed the blast furnaces. In a few years' time, they're going to open an electric arc furnace. I think this is also something we need to do a separate pod on. Yeah. But essentially, the Tories before the election had negotiated a deal with Tata whereby they put quite a lot of public money in, and Tata would guarantee they would build this electric arc furnace. There's a lot to do around this, but let's keep it brief for now. Labour said, we are going to negotiate a much better deal if you elect us. Labour got elected, they've negotiated essentially the same deal. Plaid, on the other hand, have said, this is completely unacceptable, we needed to do more, this is not enough. So I asked Luke Fletcher what he would do, and this is what he said. I'm going to ask you about Port Talbot. I think most people would say there's not any real tangible difference between the deal the Conservatives have negotiated and what Labour have now brought through. What would you have done differently?
Well, we were very clear right from the start, right? If we were serious about saving the steelworks at Port Talbot and retaining primary steelmaking, we needed to nationalise the site. Tata made it very clear right from the start that they weren't willing to budge. You could have seen that from the evidence that they were given to the Economy, Trade and Rural Affairs Committee 6 months from when the general election actually happened, or before the general election actually happened. So the reality is, if we wanted to intervene, we should have nationalised it.
How much would it cost to nationalise?
Well, that's a question that would have come down to negotiations. I mean, we've got some examples, actually, of where costs can be sort of calculated from. So in the case of Scunthorpe, where Tata owned the site in Scunthorpe, they sold the assets there to the UK government for £1. Now, there's no reason why that couldn't have happened in Port Talbot.
You think you could have nationalised Port Talbot for £1?
Well, ultimately, there's an example there with Scunthorpe where that exactly was done. The reality from Tata's perspective is they were saying they were losing money on a daily basis. Now, I have questions around actually how they rationalise that figure itself, but ultimately they wanted to get rid of that site, and I think they've been quite clear that they wanted to get rid of that site for quite some time. This boiled down to ultimately a lack of industrial strategy and a lack of clarity about what we wanted the steel sector to do.
We're going to nationalise it.
Yeah,
Easy.
for a quid.
Easy. Yeah. I will say, brilliant questioning, by the way. That was,
Yeah.
that was spiky.
I gasped when you were like,
Yeah. You're going to nationalise it for £1. I was like, oh, he's got him.
oh.
Guys, this is the first time you've ever complimented me.
There'll be more.
Yeah, there will be more. When you deserve it. Keep it going, Will. For
That was
£1.
awkward.
Yeah, like he's at a cart boot sale.
So I don't want to necessarily get into the merits of the UK steel industrial strategy at the end of the pod, but I will make some points. The first thing is, would Tata want to sell for £1? Well, when they bought the site originally, they paid £6, 8p per share. So the idea that they'd sell it for £1 now, I think, is questionable. They've since put in £5 billion into their UK operation, and they do plan to build that electric arc furnace, which will make them competitive against their European competitors, at least in the short to medium term. They have sold assets. He is right. They have sold assets for a negligible amount in the past. But the thing to bear in mind, even if you did get that for £1, you're still saying that the site in Port Talbot, Tata say loses £1 million a day. So that's then the taxpayer losing £1 million a day. The site has really unreliable old assets, which you have to replace. That blast furnace couldn't have lasted much longer anyway, and it was a matter of whether you got a new blast furnace or an electric arc furnace. You've then got the fact that 20% of Wales's CO2 emissions come from Port Talbot. 20%. That is a massive figure. I'm not here to discuss the merits of nationalisation. My point that I'm making is that this is immensely complicated, and I think the suggestion of, we'll nationalise it, doesn't necessarily suggest that it's massively thought through. The other point I'd make is, even if Plaid had every MS in the Senedd, they don't have the ability to do it because you'd need Westminster to do it. And even if Plaid won all 32 seats in Wales, they are still not going to have a Plaid government in Westminster. So ultimately, they have to operate within the boundaries of which they set. And the boundaries of which they are set for them is they would only run the Welsh Government. They would only have the financial firepower of the Welsh Government. So when they talk about, we'd nationalise it, how are you going to do that? You're going to convince a UK Labour government to do it? You're going to convince a Tory government to do it? You're going to convince a coalition to do it? Maybe that would be a condition of Plaid joining a coalition. My point is, this is really complicated, and they need much better answers to these questions if they're going to be a credible opposition and, if they ever got in, a good government.
Yeah, well, it just emphasises on a much more shallow level the fact that people need to believe that they have the talent within the party to govern. And at the moment, generally kind of liking the idea of independence is not enough to want them to be able to govern. They have to be able to show, we've got a World Cup winning team who can do all of this. That's not given that.
No.
Is there an element of this is the way they have to play it? It's worked for Starmer. This is the way you can't 18 months before a Senedd election, you can't say, well, we don't control that. Sorry.
But then the Tories were so unpopular. I just don't think Welsh Labour are that unpopular. Do you know what I mean? I think the Tories, like you say, they gave them enough rope. They were going to hang themselves. I don't know if Welsh Labour are so unpopular.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I'm not saying Plaid Cymru have to have a fully costed manifesto in place 18 months before an election. That isn't realistic. But I think the people in Wales and the media in Wales have to, if they are putting themselves forward as we are a government in waiting, we've got to treat them like a government in waiting. And they need to have good answers to those questions. And I think that is how the media and politics should interact. We should ask questions on behalf of members of the public, and parties should have to put forward reasonable and costed proposals. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes, especially in a year's time, where what they're actually putting forward. So
it's like what you said, though, right at the start, is that if they're now going to be a serious party, they're going to have to face serious scrutiny, which they haven't had before.
I totally agree. Guys, do you think we've reached the end?
Of episode 2?
Yeah. Of Welsh politics. The world?
We fixed it. You're welcome, Wales.
Sorted it, mate.
So that just leaves us to say, firstly, thank you to Heyman Media, who we work from their studios in Newport. They are absolutely fantastic. If you've got if your organisation or business needs any video, pictures, or podcasting, I highly recommend you give them a message. We weren't inundated with offers for sponsorship, which was devastating.
It's rude, frankly.
Looks like what we have been sponsored, because we've got this lovely lawn where we will put sponsored things on there. At the moment, it looks like we've got tap water as our sponsorship, which I think is
If Welsh Water do want to sponsor us,
better do comedy, mate. Yes, please. Yeah, at the moment we've got like the Old Kent Road of sponsorship.
I don't know if you know, but they are owned by the public and they never mention it.
Goodness gracious, they're not for profit water company. Yeah, absolutely. We'd love some sponsors, and we have little to no morals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
exactly.
Please, any offers?
Do you want to tell everyone who you are, where they can find you, and what you do?
Of course. My name is Robin Morgan. I'm a comedian. I'm currently on tour. I've got a couple more Welsh dates. When will this one go out? I've got Cardiff on Sunday at the Glee Club. I'm very nearly sold out. There's like 50 tickets left. So if any listeners come along, you can pay a special offer of full price.
I am Mel Owen, also a comedian and a writer. And you can find me on social media, Mel Owen Comedy. Where can we find you on socials?
You can find me in a pit of abuse on X. You can, if you want to hear more political analysis, you can get it's called The Will Hayward Newsletter. I wonder why people think I'm smug. If you sign up to that, you will get regular emails looking at issues in Welsh politics. So thanks very much, guys. That was very fun.
Yeah, see you next week.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.